Hello, everyone, and welcome to the inaugural episode of our interview series with eminent professors of accounting and finance in the UK. I'm Arman Eshraghi, Professor of Finance and Chair of CPAF, which is the professorial committee of the British Accounting and Finance Association. I'm delighted to be joined by Professor Bart Lambrecht of the University of Cambridge, a highly distinguished scholar whose work has shaped modern corporate finance, real options, mergers and acquisitions, dynamic models of firm behavior, among many other areas. Professor Lambrecht is widely respected and recognized not only for his outstanding research, but also for his mentorship and service to the academic community, including long periods of serving in senior journal editorship roles. Among his many accolades is the British Accounting and Finance Association Distinguished Academic Award, for which he was recognized earlier this year. Bart, it's a real pleasure to start this interview series with you. Thank you for your time. May I ask you to briefly introduce yourself and/or your academic journey in your own words?
Thank you for inviting me, Arman. So I'm currently a professor in finance here at Cambridge Judge Business School, and I'm also the director of the Cambridge Endowment for Research in Finance. In terms of prior history and background, so I started off with an undergraduate in applied economics at the University of Antwerp. And in my fourth and final year, I was an Erasmus exchange student at University College Dublin. I then went to University of Cambridge to do an MPhil in finance, and I followed that up with a PhD then in economics. After my PhD in economics, I was employed here at the university at the business school as a lecturer and senior lecturer, and then went off to take up a professorship at the University of Lancaster. I was there for almost 10 years, and then returned in 2013 back to Cambridge, where I'm now a finance professor. Along the way, I had a few sabbatical leaves, during which I visited University of Calgary, UCLA, and MIT Sloan.
Thank you, Bart. That's a wonderful overview. Now, let me draw on your long experience in academia and across so many leading institutions and ask you this question. In academia, researchers are assessed along several dimensions, as you're aware. In your view, what are the key criteria that matter most over the course of an academic career? And how do you see their relative importance evolving over time?
So in terms of tenure and promotion and working yourself up the ladder of the academic career, so to speak, there are three key dimensions that are being assessed, certainly here at Cambridge, and I suspect at most universities. So there is obviously research, there's teaching, and then general contribution. And of those three, in the long-term, research is really the most important one, I would say. This being said, it would be a big mistake to see the other two as some kind of a sideshow. I would say, actually, for an early career researcher in the first year of your appointment, teaching should probably be your main focus. You want to make sure that during your first year, you get your courses well up and running, that you get good feedback, and that everything kind of goes well. If you try to take shortcuts and just focus on the research, then likely you'll get bad feedback. You might end up getting a reputation for being a lousy teacher, and you'll have to revamp your courses anyway. So rather than firefighting and having to go through it several times, better to get it right first time around. Spend the time, get it right, and then you'll be able to focus a bit more on research in subsequent years. Now, in terms of general contribution, perhaps initially when you start off your career, it's not such an important pillar, perhaps. People expect that, you're a good colleague, you do your fair share of the work, you help your colleagues. But then gradually over time, this may become more important as you gain more seniority, and we can talk later about that, because obviously you will start getting more and more responsibilities and leadership roles.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. So thank you for that, Bart. Speaking of academic careers, Many early stage researchers will be listening to this. What advice would you give to early career academics who are just entering the profession or are hoping to build a long-term academic career, such as yourself?
So for early career researchers, and I'm thinking those who are like assistant professors still on probation, I would advise them to stay focused. The probationary period is usually, 5 to 7 years. It may sound like a long time, but it's pretty short, particularly if you consider how long it takes to get papers published. From writing a paper all the way to publication can easily take 5 years or more. So in that case, 5 to 7 years is not long. And the temptation may sometimes be when people start their careers to take on more projects. And there are so many temptations to get involved with so many things. I would say, in the first instance, try to get the papers from your dissertation polished, submit them to journals, and try to get them published. And then be very selective as to any additional projects you take on. Particularly, try to take on projects that hopefully will come to fruition before the end of your tenure period, before your clock runs out. Now, then, of course, once you've passed probation, once you've got tenure, then, of course, you've got a bit more freedom then to broaden your research, to branch out, and to target longer-term projects that may take a bit longer.
Thank you. Now, let's focus on the other end of this spectrum. As you know, CPAF is the professorial committee of full professors of accounting and finance in the UK. You have worked in several leading institutions and have held many senior positions. Bart, how do you personally view the role of the full professor and the responsibilities of the full professor today? And in your view, has the role changed over time?
Okay, so if you ask me about my personal experience, so I started off being a full professor at Lancaster. And so as a full professor, you're given more responsibilities and leadership roles than a junior person would. Now, this being said, when I joined Lancaster, I was only 34 years old, still pretty young, and actually the roles I did were fairly modest. So I was director of the PhD program in finance, and I sat on a few committees. So relatively modest, but then gradually, as you age, you get allocated more of those duties. So right now, for instance, I'm currently the subject group head here of the finance group at a business school. And in that capacity, you're obviously responsible for a number of things. For instance, we have gone through a major recruitment round. Actually, last month, as we speak, we just secured and appointed 2 new associate professors in finance. That obviously took a lot of preparation in terms of interviewing, going through the shortlisting procedures and so many other things, the interviews. There are other roles that come with the subject group head. There are tenure and promotion committees. You are responsible for teaching allocation. I sit currently on the faculty board and various other committees. So it kind of, most people as a full professor will have some kind of a leadership role, either subject group head or head of some program. I'm also, because of the job I have, director of SERF, the Cambridge Endowment for Research and Finance, and I've been in that role since 2013. In that role, I'm responsible. So this is an endowment that allocates funding for research and finance within the University of Cambridge, be it at the economics faculty, the business school, land economy, faculty of law. In that capacity, of course, I'm dealing with research grants, recruiting postdocs, organizing events. So, for instance, since 2014, we've been organizing a corporate finance theory symposium, which now is in its 13th edition. We've had exchanges with other universities, like Princeton, Duke, Lausanne, Nova Lisbon, in order to kind of promote research from Cambridge and exchange our ideas with partner universities. So these are all things that have come with the territory of being director of SERF. Now, when one becomes a full professor typically is also outside your university. There will be other roles that come with it. Typically, you're expected to kind of provide service to the profession, so to speak. So when I started off, this was more like being on a program committee for a conference, or being chair of examiners, or you're being asked to be external PhD examiners, sit on appointment committees. And then gradually over time, you may be asked more to do editorial roles. So I was 2012 asked to be an associate editor of the Journal of Business, Finance and Accounting. I was an associate editor of the Review of Finance, Financial Management, a few other journals. At some point then I was asked to be editor of the Journal of Corporate Finance. That was a 3-year term. So that took a significant amount of time. So these are kind of big jobs, but they are part of what service to the profession is about. And then sometimes along the way, yes, you may be asked to give keynote speeches. Like, for instance, I will be giving one at BAFA in April at its annual conference. So that's my personal experience, which you asked for. And I would think that most professors, as they age, probably experience some or more or others of those kind of roles and responsibilities throughout their career.
Thank you, Bart. So in other words, you see it as an all-encompassing role that creates impact for many constituents and not just research and publishing, which is great. Now, but speaking of research, let's turn to research quality, which is something you're widely known for championing. From your perspective, what makes a truly good, high-quality research paper? And are there common traits and attributes that consistently stand out in your view?
Okay, what would I see as a good research paper? Well, first of all, I would hope that it answers an interesting research question. Yeah, a novel, original research question, and it comes up with an answer that is rigorously thought through, and we learn something new from it, and something new in a significant way, not something trivial, but you kind of thought, oh yeah, we didn't know that, and now we understand perhaps a puzzle. There is some empirical puzzle. No one quite understands where it comes from. And then people come up with a theory or some kind of an explanation. So that's very much linked to originality, contribution. Then, of course, your paper has got to be technically correct and well executed. You want to have something that is carefully crafted, rigorous analysis, thought through, not quick and dirty, but really something that is thoughtfully done. And then finally, you would also want that the paper is well written. It reads well, it's well structured. It keeps the reader engaged, because papers can sometimes be quite long. And it's important that you keep that reader going for, 20, 30, 40 pages. And to do that, I would say, keep the reader engaged, try to be concise. If you can say things in one sentence, do it rather than 2 sentences. Try to keep it simple. Don't make things unnecessarily complicated. With that, I don't mean it shouldn't be simplistic, but if something can be explained in a simple way, do it. Often, especially junior people who start off their career may want to show off their technical expertise and perhaps how smart they are. Resist that temptation and, try to keep things simple if you can, without dumbing things down, of course. And then last but not least, so when you look at a paper, what are the key elements? Yeah, you've got the title, the abstract, introduction, the main part, conclusions, bibliography, appendix. I would say, when I read a paper and what are the key ones? It's the title, the abstract, and then I would switch to the bibliography. And I'm surely editors would do that. And then, of course, you read the introduction. And often, again, especially people who are new to the profession, bibliography may be something like an afterthought. Okay, now we need to get the references in. I remember many people for the PhD dissertation, people sometimes don't even remember the references they used, and they've got to start looking it up. Actually, it's crucial, because at the end of the day, you want to be able to position your research relative to the existing literature. And if you don't know what your peer papers are, then clearly there is an issue. And so certainly I would think when you submit it to a journal, the bibliography, and then within the introduction, how you position your papers relative to the existing literature is really crucial.
Thank you. And perhaps a related question. The flip side of this is the reality that most papers don't make it to publication. In your view, why do you think there are so few papers that ultimately get published in top journals or leading journals? What do you think tends to separate them from the rest?
Okay, so I'll mainly talk from my experiences as an editor for, say, the Journal of Corporate Finance. And I would say that the big majority of papers that get rejected, it gets rejected on the grounds that the incremental contribution of the paper is not significant enough. That's the most common reason. And by the way, rejection is really the default. You know, most top journals will perhaps publish 10% of the papers that are submitted. And it's something that initially, when you start your career, can be tough. But okay, one has to get used to it and persist. But so contribution is really the main reason. Often, so people have produced something that is a minor variation on another paper, perhaps using a different data set. Or if there is a contribution, perhaps some people fail to clearly spell it out, and it's just not made clear, and it gets lost. For theoretical papers, perhaps the referees may say, well, the result is too obvious. The distance between the assumptions and the result is too short. It's kind of predictable. So this is the main issue. Is this original, and does it make an important contribution? And is it of sufficient interest? You know, does it really matter? So, you know, people say, so what? Does it pass that test, right? Then the second most common reason would be problems with the execution. Yeah, so the empirical execution may be flawed. Typical issues are linked to identification strategies. So as an editor, you see the dreaded statement regarding endogeneity issues, reverse causality, econometric problems. For theory papers, the referees are criticizing or unhappy with the model assumptions, the model setup, or perhaps the problem hasn't been properly solved. There are, you know, technical mistakes. And that's probably the second most common reason, particularly with people who are earlier in their career. You see it less for people who are more senior. And then the third most common reason would be the exposition. So you could have a paper that is original, it is properly executed, but the authors just can't sell it. Yeah, so it might be badly written, badly structured, it's overly technical, and people reading it just don't get the message. The main message basically gets lost because the model is too complicated, there is technobabble, or there are too many details. You know, the reader can't see the wood for the trees, the wood for the tree, so to speak. And so these are the key main reasons why papers get rejected. But I would say the main one is typically contribution. If the contribution isn't there, no matter how well the things are executed, how well it is written, the paper is not going to make it into the journal.
Thank you. This is really good advice. So, just staying with this theme for one more question, what do you consider to be constructive research habits or practices? Things that perhaps in your own experience reliably improve both the quality and impact of one's academic research?
Okay, what are good research habits? Well, my first advice would be, especially again to early career researchers, work hard. Put in the hours. Thomas Edison, the inventor, used to say, genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. And I would agree with that. No, of course, when you write a paper, there's got to be this spark, this idea. But then 99% of the work is about putting in the time, going through the various stages of the research process, and particularly being persistent, because people sometimes get disheartened by being rejected from referees, and they kind of give up. At the end of the day, it's 2 steps forward, 1 step backward, and try to keep going. So work hard. The second advice I would give for people is to manage your time and focus. Focus your interests. Learn to say no. Have a concentrated portfolio of papers, and that's particularly again important in the early stage of the career. There could be a temptation, like someone who starts up the career and feels a bit like being a young person in a candy shop. There are so many sweets. Well, you've got to kind of try to focus and stick on something rather than being an academic butterfly that flies from one flower to the next. So it pays off to specialize and to go into depth rather than to dabble into many topics. Collaboration is important, and particularly more and more so, especially on empirical papers, where you can see that teamwork is increasingly more important. But it is important there that you choose your co-authors wisely. So you need to have some complementarity plus common ground, and keep the number of co-authors within reason. You don't want to disappoint co-authors and get a reputation for someone who kind of doesn't do his fair share of work. Reputation is very important, by the way, within the academic community. I would also say revise your papers and keep revising them for a long time, polish them. Never submit papers prematurely, because it's likely to lead to rejection and you lose a potential publication outlet. But then, this being said, don't revise forever. I know people who kind of just keep on revising, and the paper just doesn't kind of get submitted. That's not good either, particularly if you work in a topic that is very hot, where lots of people are working on it at the same time, and you then end up being kind of preempted and scooped, so to say. Before you submit your paper, try to get feedback from colleagues, present it to your colleagues, present it in conferences, get feedback from discussants, and take this feedback on board, because it will, otherwise you'll get the feedback from referees, but it will invariably then go together with the rejection from the journal. So many rejections from journals could have been avoided sometimes if you had seen these issues or comments before and addressed them. And that's why getting feedback is very, very important. As I previously mentioned, try to keep the paper simple, short, concise. I know it's not easy, and I'm violating myself often some of those rules. My papers tend to be rather long, but I do my best, and so certainly try that. And then finally, try to identify, when you write your paper, who is your target audience and what are your target journals. You want to do that before. Otherwise, people sometimes submit a paper to a journal, and the journal might just say, well, you get a desk rejection because the journal says, well, it's not exactly our type of research. Perhaps why don't you submit it to this type of journal? And so thinking about who your target audience is, what your target journal is, might help you when you write up the paper, rather than retrospectively having to rewrite things.
Thanks, Bart. Excellent advice. I've certainly made the mistake of sometimes revising too much and sitting on a paper. So thank you. Let me take the conversation now to a different direction, which is the future of academic research. Now, looking ahead and drawing on your sense of where the field of finance is going, what do you see as the most important trends or changes that will shape academic finance research in the coming years?
Right. What do I see potentially as the main change for researchers in the coming years? And I think that change is going to be relevant not only for finance, but for most areas in research. And that change, I believe, is going to be the role that artificial intelligence, AI, is going to play for research and research activities. To some extent, I believe that AI is going to democratize research. You know, up to now, we've had access to, personal computers, software packages, and things like that. These are tools that help us, right? And that we can use. AI kind of goes a step further. AI is almost like a personal research assistant, right? It can collect information, it can collect references, process this information, summarize it, draw conclusions, and it can even generate potentially some new stuff at the margin based on what is out there. That's that's a step change, really. And it means that to some extent, research becomes more available to many now, right? If you have access to AI. But paradoxically, I think it's going to raise the bar for researchers as to what is going to be considered to be top quality research. Because going forward, people will get very little credit for bringing together what is already out there, right? Because a 15-year-old child could almost do this now and try to collect things and bring it all together. So what it will mean, I believe, is that more and more emphasis is going to be put on creativity and originality. So about thinking outside the box, because that's what AI to some extent cannot yet do, and where researchers can have an edge. And if I go back to my previous elements of dimensions of papers in terms of contribution, execution, and exposition, I think it will mean that the element of contribution and originality will become even more important than it now is. Because AI will be able to assist people with technicalities and technical execution. So the idea that you will get brownie points for perhaps solving a technical problem, well, if it is really new, yes, because AI may not be able to do it. But standard technical issues, well, probably the brownie points you might have got up to now for this, they probably will evaporate, right? To some extent, exposition, AI probably will assist too. Okay, up to now, we can have the help of word processors that will do spell checks, grammar checks. AI will probably push this a step further. And that will mean, on the one hand side, that yes, people for whom English is not their first language, there will be a bit more like a level playing field. Because clearly, yes, if you are struggling with English, that was potentially an impediment of getting your papers published. With the advent of AI, perhaps that might become a little less of an impediment because people might be able to get their text screened for errors, right? And severe issues. So the exposition, perhaps again, it will still be very important. But I think more and more of the emphasis, I suspect, going forward will be shifting towards originality and contribution and the ideas.
Thank you, Bart. Again, very compelling advice. Now let's conclude by asking you in terms of advice for aspiring senior academics. So, for those who are thinking long term, especially for junior academics who aspire to become full professors, what would be your key piece of advice?
Hey, it's a big question, of course. Advice for a junior academics who aspire to become full professors. But let me try. So I'll give you 4 pieces of advice. So, and I will be repeating to some extent myself. So my first advice would be work hard, put in the hours. I know very few people who get there ultimately without putting in the hours. So that would be the first thing. Secondly, there are only 24 hours in a day. Okay, so there is only so much you can do. Therefore, stay focused, be selective, and choose your targets wisely. Don't fight on too many fronts, particularly not when you start your career. My third advice would be to say that an academic career is a marathon. It's not a sprint. If people are lucky and have good health, it could easily span 40 years. And I know people who are active even in their 80s. So we are in the unique position to be able potentially to have a very long career compared to many other people out there. So it is really a marathon. So it's important, therefore, to pace yourself. You don't want to get burned out, and you try to have a balanced life. And with a balanced life, I mean, there should be more than research and teaching. There should be a place for family life, hobbies, faith, physical exercise, time for yourself. And then you'll be able to keep it going. And then finally, I'd say becoming a full professor is perhaps not should not be the be all and end all. Okay. At the end of the day, I think what is important is that you enjoy what you do. So I would say, try to enjoy your work, have fun, work on problems you enjoy that make you excited. And I think you'll have a satisfying and fulfilling career, even if you do not make it a full professor.
Indeed. Thank you, Bart. Just going back to your marathon analogy, there is an Irish comedian whose line is, life is like a marathon that you have to sprint. So that's it's, perhaps close to the truth. So, Professor Lambrecht, thank you so much for sharing such thoughtful, insightful reflections. I know many early career researchers will find what you said invaluable. It's been a pleasure having you on the podcast, and we wish you continued success with your research and leadership at Cambridge. And to those who are listening, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to welcoming you back for our next episode. Thank you.
Thank you, Arman.
Pleasure.